Good afternoon. This is your lesson 3, science. Your LC is, can I classify animals based on their characteristics? So we're going to move on in our learning today on something that we touched upon in our last lesson, which was about Carl Linnaeus. But before we do that, think back to your previous learning in school, not just in year 6, but across the school. What different animal types are there? And you will have come across these time and again in your lessons. Well, we can classify animals into 2 broad groups, vertebrates or invertebrates. Now you should know what these are, but just to remind you, vertebrates are animals with a backbone, invertebrates animals without a backbone. And then you can see that the vertebrates are broken down into fish, birds, reptiles, mammals, and amphibians as well. Invertebrates, well, you could break those down again into different groups with jointed legs, without jointed legs, and then they could be broken down again too. So we can classify in that way. So always thinking about classifying living things. So a standard system, touched upon this in our last lesson. A standard system, so one that everybody uses, is useful because it allows scientists to accurately identify groups and properly name animals. Without a standard system, living things could be classified and named differently by different scientists, which would be very confusing and defeat the purpose of having a classification system in the first place. Taxonomist is a biologist, that's somebody who works with living things, who specializes in the classification of organisms into groups on the basis of their structure and origin and behavior. So what they're like, what they look like, how they're structured, where they came from, and how they behave. So who was Carl Linnaeus? This name I keep talking about. Very important because Linnaean classification is the system still used today. He was a Swedish taxonomist who believed it was very important to have a standard system of classifying living things. At the time he was alive in the 1700s, there was no agreed standard methods. So one scientist might have thought one thing, one scientist might have thought another, and so on. So that could get very confusing if scientists are working in different countries, for example, or sharing their work, as all scientists do. Linnaeus collected and examined over 40,000 specimens of plants, animals, and shells. In 1735, he published his first edition of Systema Naturae, which described his system for classifying living things. Over the next several years, Linnaeus continued to publish new editions of Systema Naturae that included more species of living things. His 10th edition was published in 1758 and is considered to be the most important edition. So how does the Linnaean system work? Well, Linnaeus' original system of classification classified everything in nature into a hierarchy, so there was an order. He proposed that there were 3 large groups called kingdoms, into which the whole of nature could fit. These kingdoms were plants, animals, and minerals, and he then split each kingdom into smaller and smaller groups or levels. And today, the Linnaean system is the only one used to classify living things, so it does not include minerals. Furthermore, as new living things have been discovered, scientists have had to add additional levels in the hierarchy. A new level above kingdom called domain has also been introduced. So like in all science, an idea is introduced and it's developed over time and built upon. So that's what all scientists do. So they took out minerals because they're not non-living things, and it just focuses now on living things. And this diagram shows the level of classification in the system. Living things can be classified by following the levels in the system from the top down. So at the top, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Once you've done that, you will find the exact living thing. There are 3 domains: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Plants and animals are all eukaryotes. There are 6 kingdoms, including animals, plants, fungi, and bacteria. The 6 kingdoms then split into phyla. There are more than 30 phyla in the animal kingdom. Phylum core data includes all vertebrates, so we would be under that. Each phyla is divided into classes. The core data of phylum includes animals, amphibians, birds, mammals, reptiles, and fish. And the order and the family divide into further groups. The genus includes species that are very closely related and share unique body structures. And a species is defined as a group of animals that can reproduce to produce fertile offspring. Okay, so there's an awful lot to take in there, but what you need to know is that there is a system that we can classify living things. So for example, we might have at the top level domain a number of different living things. Then when we look at the kingdom, we notice that one of those is removed, daisy, because now we're looking at the animals, so we remove the plants. We then move down into the phylum, and we can see that that list grows smaller and smaller until eventually we end up with the species of dog. So we started with a great list, and then each time we get down the list, we end up with just one species. Imagine it like a triangle that's upside down, an inverted triangle, okay? At the top, it's quite wide, and then as we move down the list, we end up with one species. And if you think about it, that system was designed hundreds of years ago, and it's still used today. So it shows what a clever man Carl Linnaeus was with his Linnaean system of classification. Now, the genus and species are always written in italics, so that's that slanted writing. That's just to help you a little bit, but we don't need to worry about italics. The scientific name for a dog is Canis lupus. Also, that shows as well just how many of our words come from Latin. So there's Latin used for those names, and I'll explain to you why in a moment. But canis, well, if you think about it, canine is the word that's used associated with dogs. So canis comes, canine comes from that. And lupus actually refers to wolves. And our dogs have all been bred. But if you trace back their family tree, you eventually go back in time. They evolved from wolves, and lupus means, or lupine means wolf. Does that make sense? Okay, here's a way to remember the order of classification. So we have, as we said before, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Well, you could use a mnemonic, and you could come up with your own for this. That's a fun thing to do. So an example would be, do keep precious creatures organized for grumpy scientists. So the first letter of each word there reminds us D, K, P, C, O, F, G, S, and that's domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So that's a fun way that you could do that. You could come up with your own, just change some of the words as long as they've got the same letter at the start, then that will help you to remember them. Okay, in year 4, in your year groups across school, actually, you've learned about different types of animals. Classed into 2 groups, we should know, vertebrates and invertebrates. Okay, difference was vertebrates have a backbone, invertebrates don't have a backbone, and then we can split those down into groups again further. Vertebrates can be sorted into mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians. There are lots of different groups of animals. Can you think of an example animal for each group? Think about what you've learned, not just in year 4, but previously across school. Mammals, can you think of an example? Use the pictures to help you. You should be able to name most of these. Not sure about echinoderms, yeah, or crustaceans perhaps. We should certainly recognize those creatures. Okay, here's your task then, please. In your research, in your pack, your resource pack, you have this sheet, and it's got 4 different creatures on it. I would like you to use the internet to find out what the species name is, what the genus is, find out how many legs it's got, and find out whether it has an exoskeleton. So the answers that will be yes or no. Now, if you're not sure what an exoskeleton is, you can research that, can't you, using the internet? And task 2, I'd like you to pick an animal from the previous slide. How would it be classified using Linnaean classification? So pick one of those animals, and how would it be classified using Linnaean classification, just like we did earlier? Now, I found out ladybird very easily using the internet. So just some keywords can help you. For example, if you type in the animal, I typed in ladybird, and then I typed in Linnaean classification, and that was the first page that came up on Google. It's really easy for me to find that. And you notice all of these words here: Animalia, Arthropoda, Insecta, Coleoptera. This language is unusual to us. It is Latin. But many of our words, as we said before about dog and wolf, have actually come from Latin originally. They have Latin and Greek origins. Now, the reason why Carl Linnaeus chose Latin for naming and his classification key is because it was what's known as a dead language. So people don't use it anymore. So why might he use a dead language? Well, if you think about it, very clever actually. If a scientist in one country names it, and he names it in his or her language, and a scientist in another country thinks, hold on, that's not fair because that's their language, that's not my language, then it could cause arguments. And especially, certainly in the times that Carl Linnaeus lived, many countries were at war with one another. So they wouldn't really want to be speaking another country's language. So he thought, okay, good idea. Let's use Latin because it's a dead language. People don't use it other than for historical purposes. They don't speak it normally in countries. So they said, let's use Latin. And also the other thing with Latin is it helps because if we stick to one language, Latin, then no matter what, a scientist working in this country or a scientist working in another country, they're using the same language, they're using a common name, and that way things don't get confused. So very clever system, very helpful, very useful system, and it works. And it still works now, hundreds of years after it was created. So you can learn a little bit of Latin in this lesson, but it's more so, I really want you to take away from this lesson that all living things can be classified according to their structure, where they come from, their origin, and their behavior. And this is how all things are classified. Until our next lesson, goodbye. You know where to find me for any support or any help, and I will help you. Goodbye.